welcome everyone. My name is Alexandra. I help manage the workshops programming with Blue Thumb. I'm so glad that you are all here tonight. We have a couple of little intro slides before we get into the presentation. So I'm just gonna jump through a couple of those really quick to get to the person you really wanna talk with. This workshop we present all of our workshops in partnership with host cities, and so this one is being brought to you tonight in partnership with St. Louis Park. We're so grateful to have them as a partner to help us put on this workshop every year. And with that, I'm actually just going to hand it straight over to Eric.
Super.
To introduce himself.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Eric Francis. I'm the Water Resources Manager for the city. Thank you for your interest in managing stormwater. Couple things tonight, besides their wonderful presentation, it is also our Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program open house. So we have a bunch of information over there. If you have any questions about how we manage stormwater, how we implement our programs, salt usage, street sweeping, you name it, we'll be here to talk about it for a while. We also are kicking off our annual Rainwater Rewards Rain Garden Lottery. This is our ninth year. We partner with Metro Blooms and the Conservation Corps. We got $27,000 in grant money to help put them in. Basically, the program is you sign up. There's a button on the Rainwater Rewards program to sign up. Click the Rainwater Rewards Lottery, put your name in, and we will do a drawing on the 13th of April. So it'll be open until about the 10th of April. They will start sending out notifications for the winners. We have 30 this year. They will start doing consultations. If you don't get on the first round, there's always a few people that back out. So there's always opportunities to get extra. Conservation, Metro Blooms will do the design. Conservation Corps will come and dig the hole and haul the soils away. And then we'll have a plant pickup event sometime in August over at the Nature Center, if you haven't been there, really fun place. And then you have the fun to put all the plants in and watch it grow. So it's a really great program. Most of the rain gardens come in at about $150 per resident. So it's a significant contribution. We also have our do-it-yourself side as well. It's on the same sign up, where we can fund everything from pervious pavers, green roofs, water reuse systems, larger, more elaborate rain gardens. We can finance 75% up to $3,000. So some real money. So with all that said, our consultant, Della from Young Environmental, is over there as well. So we'll be here to answer any questions if you got them. Thank you. Now I'll leave it to you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Quick agenda for the evening. I am going to take a moment to read our land acknowledgement before handing it over to our presenters, who will do about 30-ish minutes of presentation, and then we'll go into the breakout groups, which will be one-on-one with a designer and a master gardener and an intern who will be learning and sharing with you about your specific projects. So that will be the meat of the presentation, or the meat of the workshop this evening. And with that, I am going to take a moment to just ground us in our land and labor acknowledgement. This is a statement that Metro Blooms specifically, worked with some different community organizations to help us draft, including Wakantipi Anwanyagape, which is an indigenous-led organization in St. Paul, as well as another community member, O. Smith, who helped inform the labor portion. We like to read this before every workshop because we're going to spend the whole evening talking about native plants, and it's so important for us to ground ourselves in the geography that we're in and the homelands that we're in, and the people who have been caring for these plants and lands for so long. We are on the stolen homelands and treaty territory of the Dakota Oyate. Minnesota, the US government, and European white colonizers carried out genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced removal of the Dakota to acquire land and wealth. The Iowa, Ho-Chunk, Anishinaabe, and other indigenous nations have also called this region home. The waters and plants here have traditional, spiritual, and cultural significance to the indigenous peoples of this land who are still here stewarding them. We acknowledge the violent exploitation, trafficking, and enslaved labor of Africans and their descendants by white colonizers on these same stolen lands. Deeply rooted white supremacy continues to propagate injustices in health, wealth, and opportunity. Here and across the country, Black communities are segregated and displaced, disrupting traditions and relationships with land. We benefit greatly from the undervalued and co-opted contributions of Black communities who have made possible much of our country's economic and cultural growth. We encourage you to reflect internally. How does white supremacy show up in your life? How might you be participating in it? And how can we come together to mobilize change? We continue to have much to learn from Minnesota's Indigenous and Black communities about how we relate to each other and the earth. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our presenters now to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're excited to talk to you. We'll go through our presentation. If stuff comes up for you, you're welcome to ask a question while we're giving the presentation. Don't hesitate. My name is Jennifer Ellert. You have the Jennifer team tonight, so it makes it really easy for you to remember our names. I'm a landscape architect. I've been at Metro Blooms for, I think, 13 years now, and I've been giving these presentations for a really long time. I'm excited to talk to you all about, developing pollinator habitat in your yard.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer as well. Jennifer Moeller, Director of Neighborhood Projects, and also spearheading with Eric the rain garden program for St. Louis Park. So if you have questions about that, hit me up later. I can certainly answer a lot too. Yeah, landscape designer at Metro Blooms for about 7 years now, and looking forward to talking to you this evening about all of the possibilities in your yard. With that, we'll kind of jump right in. So what we're going to walk through is assessing your site first. So if you're talking about how you want to approach your yard for planting for pollinators, first is big thing, assessing your site. What do you have already? And then we'll go into how can you make a plan and a design for where you're going next. And then how do you get it installed? And finally, how do you have maintenance or land care, as we like to call it, a little bit more soft in that rather than maintenance. So that's where we're going in our presentation tonight. So to jump right in, so when you are looking at your site, some of the basic things that we start off with in every project that we work on is figuring out what's present, what's going to stay, what's going to change, what are your hard, immovable objects that are needing to stay on your property. Typically that includes your buildings, your home, your roof, fences, walls, hardscapes, utilities. Those are all things that need to stay in place just to make sure you have your home in order. We want to put those on the base maps first. Those inform a lot of other features. But then from there, you can really get into, okay, where are your existing trees? Where are the canopies involved in that? Where do you think the root systems are? All of those pieces can inform how your beds are going to be successful. And then your existing planting beds. And then big piece is water flow. Water flow infects your soils. How many plants will thrive in areas that have a lot more water inundation versus a lot drier scenarios? Both of those inform what plants are going to be successful for you over time. And functionality, big piece of it, finally, is how you use your space. So if you are walking through your space and creating new paths that aren't necessarily concrete, that's a really good thing to keep in mind. Or if you've got a mailman walking through a particular path over the winter, those type of things will all inform how you use your space and how you want to start creating your base map, as we call it. So once you have that down, big thing to dive into is how is sunlight going to affect your site? So we're just kind of getting on the same page here about what it means to plant for pollinators, and a big piece is it's about 6 hours or more for getting full sun, and then 3 to 6 hours for part sun, and if you have 3 hours or less, we consider that shade, so full shade. Those will inform what plants will be successful or not in your area. Combine that with all those other features that we were talking about with water flow, with existing plants, all of those things start adding up to what will be successful as you start creating new gardens. One big rule to keep in mind, your morning sun is always less intense than the evening and the afternoon. So I'm sure you've felt that if you've sat out on a patio on the west side versus the east side. Big difference in environmental feeling there. So kind of keep that in mind for your baby plants as well. And then assessing your site first, the soils. It's a big factor, again, for what's going to be successful on your site as you plan out new gardens. Big piece is the moisture piece. So do you have a lot of water running off to a specific area? That's going to, if you can just do a little field test over the course of the seasons. What feels wet, what feels dry? All of those things will help inform what's going to be successful in the ground. But then also, take into account your observations with your eyes as you dig. If you see something that looks sandy, it falls apart in your hand when you pick it up, you're probably dealing with sandy soil. Similarly, on the opposite side, if you pull it out of the ground and you start squeezing it a lot and it starts feeling like you're pushing out ribbons from between your fingers, that's more on the clay side. It's a really easy way to kind of determine what content is in the ground. So varies between every single site, of course, so just keep an eye on what your soils are doing every time you dig. Really informative. Then your soil health. We live in an urban area, so typically there's a lot going on over time in these spaces, and you're going to see a lot of compaction, whether that's from previous building, from just walking over the same paths every single day. We see a lot of compaction just where your gates are, going between one front lawn to the backyard, that kind of thing. But then if you are needing that to decompact for an area that you want to put in new plants, consider adding organic material to kind of help loosen that up, and that can start getting the microbial life going again. And then after breaking all of that up, it's a really good idea to kind of minimize how much disturbance you do after that, because you can really start giving the soil a chance to build itself back up, get some really good microbes and nutrients back for the plants that you're wanting to put in later. And then a really big piece is try to keep your soil covered as much as possible. Not only is it going to save your back in the long run because it suppresses weeds, but it's going to keep that erosion factor. So every time we have a storm, if there is open soil, you are at the risk of erosion of all your soil running off down the stream and into our local water bodies. And so it's a really easy way to get something over that soil, just a little bit of mulch, or get it planted with something new to get it covered up for the next rainstorm. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to jump into plants a little more.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know you all are here to learn about pollinator plantings tonight, which is so exciting. And there's a few things we want you to consider that you may not think of when you're looking at kind of your typical landscaping. We really want you to be thinking about what pollinators need in a planting in order to survive. What they need is something to eat all season long. Our season for pollinators could start in April, in the next month, and really they'll emerge from the soil or emerge from their kind of winter nesting spots, and they'll be around until the fall, and that can be November. So having something blooming all season long is really, really critical for supporting pollinators. So as you're thinking about adding pollinator habitat to your yard, you might love purple coneflower that's in this picture here. That's wonderful, but it only blooms in the middle of the summer. So then you need to make sure you're including plants that are going to bloom in the spring, and you're including plants that are going to bloom in the fall. So you really have those flowering resources which are providing pollen and nectar for pollinators all season long. And if there's nothing else you walk away from remembering from this workshop, that's a really critical piece, is having a native plant blooming all season long is going to really help support adding pollinators to your yard. Because then they've got all they need. They've got plenty to eat all season long in your yard. So it's really critical. Of course, if you're interested in seeing monarch butterflies in your yard, then you do want to consider host species. So monarch butterflies need milkweed as their host plant in order to lay their eggs. So you can be thinking about the specific life cycle of that species. If they're a very charismatic species, if you're interested in having more monarchs in your yard, you want to make sure you have host plants for them so they have a really conducive space to live. So milkweed in that case is really important. Access to nesting sites. We'll talk a little bit about land care and maintenance as we get later into the presentation, but that can be things like leaves that you don't clean up in your yard. That can look like hollow stems of bee balm that you don't cut back, or that when you do, excuse me, you leave kind of tall So there's plenty of hollow stems for those stem nesting species to be able to nest into. And then of course, we're attracting all these pollinators to our yards, right? It's so exciting. The last thing we want to do is then apply a bunch of chemicals that can then really be detrimental to their health. And that is not just insecticide, which is meant to kill insects, but that can look like herbicide, to kill weeds. It's really negatively impacting our insect species, so reducing or eliminating chemical input is going to be really critical for that long-term survival of pollinators. There are a few different styles, so now you know kind of the basics of bringing pollinator habitat into your yard, and now you can start to think a little bit about the aesthetics of it. So we want pollinators to come feed off of that, but it can also look absolutely beautiful for you too. And so we can start thinking about the aesthetics of how do you want to plant this? And one of the styles we recommend that's very easy if some of these plants are new to you is plant massing. So instead of having one coneflower over here and one over here and maybe one over there, you really want to plant a big grouping of them, maybe 7 or 8 or something like that in one area. And that's going to help for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's going to make it easier for pollinators to find them. So they'll have plenty of flowers there to feed on. It's really easy to find, lots of food available to them. But it can also help you in terms of maintenance. So maybe you do a bunch of planting this year, and then next spring, even now I go out in my yard and stuff starts popping up. The next spring stuff starts coming up, and you're thinking, I have no idea what this is. Is this a weed or did I plant this? I really can't tell. Well, a good strategy is to say, okay, these all really look the same. There's this one coming up that looks really different. That's probably a weed. So it just can help you, if nothing else, maintain your yard in the future because you have a very regular pattern. If you seed with a wildflower mix, for example, this is a real struggle, right? The seeds come up and you don't know what's what. And so that's why plant massing, starting by planting individual plants or plugs and planting a big group of them, can be really helpful for you in learning how to maintain your yard and how to maintain these particular species. You'll start to build a relationship with those plants. You start to get to know them, and you know what's what. So that's one good strategy. There are a lot of ways you can use plant massing in shade gardens too. So if you have a really shady spot, you're interested in supporting pollinators, please ask those questions as we individually meet with you. We have such a wonderful resource here on our master gardeners and our designers, and we would love to tell you about all the native shade species that would do really well in your yard. Let's see, so we're planting these big groupings throughout the year, but just don't forget to plant those diverse species, something that's going to bloom in spring, summer, and fall, and you can have big groupings of each so that it's easy for you to maintain and pollinators have something to feed on all season long. The other planting design style, which can be really useful in really large spaces, is matrix plantings. Matrix plantings are when we have really a base of grasses and sedges. You can see in this picture, there's some really lovely sedges in this boulevard. A base of grasses and sedges, and then kind of flowers scattered throughout, flowering species scattered throughout. So this may make it a little bit more difficult for you to identify them, but it also can be really helpful in spaces like boulevards. We all know that boulevards are a very difficult growing environment. Has anybody here had a difficult time growing something in their boulevard? I have. What's that?
What is a sedge?
A sedge is a species of plant. The species is Carex. It looks a lot like what we would all of us commonly call grasses, but sedges are a completely different genus, and they tend to get green early in the year. So in April and May, and we all want a little bit of green, right? Because it's been a lot of snow cover in Minnesota. We start to see sedges greening up. They serve kind of the same function as a grass. What is really helpful about grasses and sedges is that they tend to cover the ground really quickly. So in a boulevard, it's often compacted, or we have a lot of weedy species that grow in the boulevard. So by planting grasses and sedges fairly closely together, they can begin to out-compete some of those weeds that might otherwise want to come up in the space between all of the plants. So this is a really good strategy if you will be developing your planting in an area that is linear, like a boulevard, or that is maybe has a lot of existing weedy species that you're going to need some help out competing. And so this is one good way to do that. Again, happy to answer more questions, like to see if that is helpful to apply to your space individually when you talk to your team in the breakout sessions. And then, of course, there's flowering species interspersed in this, something to bloom spring, summer, and fall, so really we can keep that pollinator benefit. Another thing to consider, which I don't know that we all do when we're thinking about supporting pollinators, are trees and shrubs. Trees and shrubs are very low maintenance, right? Nobody's ever asked me to design a high maintenance garden for them, just so you know. Most everybody wants a low maintenance garden. And so one way to do that is to incorporate trees and shrubs. Our trees and shrub species often bloom early in the spring when nectar is really critical for pollinators. They can provide a lot of like stacked environmental benefits. They're providing shade, they're soaking up stormwater runoff, and they don't need quite as much sort of like cutting back or tending. And so trees and shrubs can provide privacy, they're host species, and they really could be very beneficial. Some like serviceberry, our willows are very critical species for pollinators, do quite a lot to help support insects in our area in general. A couple of things to consider, especially when planting trees. It's really important to look up and just make sure you're not planting it right under a low power line to your house or something like that. It's also really important to get your underground utilities marked. If you have an old sewer line to your house and 5 years from now that needs to be replaced, you really don't want to dig up that tree in order to replace that sewer line. So get those utilities marked. Ideally, you're staying about 10 feet away from any underground utilities that are coming into your house, like your water, your sewer, your gas line, or your telecom line. So call, go for State 1, call or 811 and have your utilities marked. Those are just smart things to think about. I think the best time to plant a tree was like 20 years ago, right? So that's a great investment in what your yard will look like in the future, and it's really easy to maintain. We're going to switch over so you can think about how to get your project started.
All right, I'll jump in again here. Site preparation. So once you've kind of decided what your project's going to start out as, the big pieces, of course, is how are you going to remove the turf? That's usually what most of our homes have in those areas. And to start getting that moving, there's a few different methods for doing that. You could use a sod cutter, which is what is pictured there. There's, Ready Rinse has those. A lot of the garden stores have those. A little bit easier than just using the shovel, but it's has a blade that cuts about 2 inches underneath your grass, and you just kick it along, and then you roll it up. So it's a really quick way. Yeah, go ahead.
What was the name of that?
It's a sod kicker. So that's one way to do it. You could also use hand digging. You can do that route depending on the size that you're working with. A fairly petite garden could easily be taken up just by a shovel. But if you're looking at a larger space, or you're trying to take care of a space that's gotten a little bit out of control over the years or anything like that, you can consider sheet mulching or solarization, which is basically putting some plastic down, whether that's black or clear. It both achieves the end goal, but you put that down to start smothering out the species that are existing, killing out the weed seed, and clearing out the grass that's there. So lots of details that go into doing that, and if that's something you're interested in, we can certainly highlight that as we talk to you. Yeah, go ahead.
I have been saving a ton of cardboard to probably do sheet mulching.
It depends on how many layers you put down, but the more cardboard takes a little bit of time to decompose, and so there will be that runoff for a while where the water is just going to be rediverted, and so that's going to have a different impact than what like maybe one layer will versus like lasagna methods or that kind of thing. Depends on how you build it back up. Anything to add, Jen?
No, I mean, I would just say that sheet mulching is very helpful, especially in areas where you have a lot of weed pressure. So it can be very helpful in areas where maybe you've had a particular weed that's been very difficult, and it can be helpful because it helps you get your native plants established while the cardboard is breaking down. It will eventually break down, and it gives your native plants kind of that like chance to get going before, you know, creeping bellflower comes back up or something like that. And so that's when it can be helpful. So if you don't need to do it, if you're just removing turf that doesn't have a lot of weeds, maybe you don't need to sheet mulch. It kind of depends on your situation, but it can be really helpful in kind of holding back some of the weeds in the soil. There are weeds in all the soil. So it depends on your, you know, what you need, and that would be a good question to ask your designer. As you kind of get to that, we could help you dig further into that.
Pun intended. So a big piece of it, of course, is after you've taken that soil off, cover up that soil. You don't want to introduce the opportunity for adding more weeds to what you already are working with. So we generally, in most of our projects, will put down mulch first before we do any of the planting. And that's a way to suppress the weeds as well as keep your water in the soil more and get it ready. Because then once you have your plants, all you have to do is pull it back. You've already prepped everything there. Tuck it in, green side up. Tuck it back in with your mulch. Not volcano, but donut for your little plants. But it's a really good way to just kind of have everything ready for you, and then you could run back and get all of your plants at the garden store or whatever your program is, and not have to worry about any sudden rainstorms that'll wash away your new garden bed. Big piece of it too, once you have that mulch down, if you can lay your plants out first before starting to dig any of them, it'd be really a little easier on your back over the long haul. Sometimes we start just jumping in on one side of the planting garden and we start, you know, putting everything pretty closely together initially, and then we get to the back of the garden and realize, oh, most of my plants are already over here. So if you can lay them all out from the beginning, then you'll have everything spaced out really nicely. You won't have to worry about going back and popping them back out and adjusting where you've put everything. Land care. So, big piece of land care is watering at least once a week for the first 2 growing seasons. And that, of course, depends on drought or how many rainstorms we have in the spring. All of those pieces kind of add up to do that little mental math. And you could also do a soil test if you want to stick your finger in the soil. Usually it's just up to the first knuckle. If it comes out wet, you're doing okay. If not, give it a good water. We want to do longer watering sessions. So if you can get out there with your hose or your sprinkler and run it for 20 to 30 minutes instead of just like going over the top, it makes the plants a little bit more successful. Basically what you're doing is encouraging the roots to go down further into the ground to chase after that water, as opposed to acting like turf and sticking all of their roots up at the very top of the soil layer. What that can look like for the 1 inch every week is just throw out a tuna can. So anything that is not a bowl, but the short sides, and run that water and see how long it takes to fill up that tuna can. And that's approximately 1 inch. And you'll be able to kind of tell what the flow rate is for your hose system or your irrigation system and know how long you need to be watering to get that 1 inch. Weeds are easiest to manage when they are small. So really seems like a very simple statement, but a lot of times, you know, our lives get away from us, and so it's easy for them to kind of get out of control. A few things to kind of keep in mind with that is try to get out there at each of the major holidays. So Labor Day, Memorial Day, and 4th of July. If you can get out there at those times, basically what you're doing is getting ahead of the weed seeds. So each plant has its own life cycle, and each plant gets to a point where they're going to develop more seeds and then put those seeds back into the ground. You don't want those weed seeds back into your ground and creating more for you to then pull up the next year. And so the idea is get out there before those weed seeds, and that's kind of what that timing does, is you can get ahead of some of those weed species. We love to go to an app named Picture This. It's a really good app to do that plant identification. So if you are unsure about whether your new garden bed has a weed versus the one you planted after, you know, all the rain washes away the little plant tags or that kind of thing, You know, that's a really good way to come back around and say, oh yeah, okay, this one's the one that I wanted versus this one is now introduced itself. So, and then big piece of land care is, you know, edit your garden. If you don't like it the way it looks, give it an edit. You move things around, replace plants as they need it, or divide and thin. You know, it's your space. And just as we were talking about with like site assessment from the beginning, know what you're doing with your site. Know what you want it to look like. That is your space, and you want to make it your own that way. And then coming back around to the pollinators. So if we are talking about land care for pollinators, they need the overwintering and the habitat spaces overwinter. It's crazy world out there over winter. We don't quite know what we're going to get every year. And so being able to leave your sticks, your mulch, your leaves, your grasses, and your natives taller over the winter, they actually burrow into those stems, and that's where they are surviving. And so it's really great to be able to leave those things up. You know, save your back. You don't have to go out there and clean everything up perfectly. It'll be a wonderful space for your pollinators to hang out in over the winter time. And then if you can wait for that cleanup time, I know it's hard, but wait until the dandelions start showing up. It's a really good indicator of the soil temperature, and that's usually around the 50-degree mark where the little pollinators are coming back out and getting out into the world instead. If you can leave your leaves on your planting beds, that would be great. It's a really easy source of organic matter. That gets the soil's microbial life growing, but it also gives the habitat back to your little pollinators. They are hiding under those leaves and getting that insulation from all of our crazy temperatures. And then, of course, goes without saying, fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides will all kind of have a detrimental effect on our little pollinators. So if you can avoid using those, it'll give them a little bit more survival rate. And then they, like us, needs water. And so it's, you know, they're going to be looking for where the water sources are. There are some fun little cups that you can put out that are specifically for pollinators if you want to get into that. But if you want to create, you know, like just the bird baths or, you know, little bowls if you have dogs out there anyway, you know, that kind of thing. It serves dual purpose. Get some water out for the little guys too.